you to have a look. There we go. He's got all the usual stuff on there.
Yeah, Andy did an absolutely beautiful job of designing this website. It's the best one I've ever had. It's wonderful.
And of course, you can see here that we're talking about Titanic again tonight. And Tim's written the play about this, but also the radio show is on this website. So it's under Titanic Radio Show. So it's there. Right. I think we're at part 16 now of or 17. So we'll get that one up. And
right, so we're looking at slide 17 from the Titanic PowerPoint. The damage to the Olympic, the sister ship, was quickly assessed after its collision with the HMS Hawk, the Navy ship. It was determined that all three standard manganese bronze propeller blades were damaged beyond repair and required replacing. The starboard propeller boss arm plating had been twisted and fractured. The propeller shaft was bent out of alignment and rendered inoperable. 11 hull plates were damaged above the waterline, 8 of which had to be replaced. There was a hull breach of 7 feet with a 12 to 15 foot pear-shaped hole rising from the waterline to D deck, and a gash 40 feet wide was incurred below the waterline. The ship's frame was also bent out of alignment, and thousands of her hydraulically fitted rivets were no longer watertight. So that's pretty extensive damage, to say the least. So slide 18, the temporary repairs at Southampton took about 2 weeks. Some researchers believe the damage was more extensive than the White Star Line led on, given that the ship had to be emptied of all its cargo, surplus coal, perishable food stores, etc. A 2-week dry dock period for assessment and repairs was not an unreasonably long period for a layover. On Wednesday, October 4th, 1911, the crippled ship then left for the shipyard in Belfast for further repairs. The 370-mile run to Belfast was necessary for making further repairs.
well, that's the pictures of the blemishes on the bow.
Mm-hmm. So there is one serious anomaly, however. The damage from the Hawk collision was supposed to be in the vicinity of the ship's stern, about 86 feet from the ship's stem post. However, a bow schematic sent from Harlan and Wolff showed that the Olympic had suffered hull damage around the waterline as far forward as the second bulkhead from the bow. It showed that hull plating between watertight compartments 2, 3, and 4 may have been compromised. If this sustained damage had really occurred, why is it not mentioned in any of the reference materials? The schematic from Harlan and Wolff appears to show that the Hawk first collided with the Olympic 100 feet forward of the bridge, causing damage to about 115 feet of the Olympic's hull plating below or near the waterline. Such damage would only have been visible when the ship was in dry dock. Robert Ballard's exploration sub that went down to the bottom of the sea just off the Grand Banks to explore the wreck and photograph the wreck off the Grand Banks of Newfoundland, found that the bulkheads did not match the blueprints of Titanic, but rather that of her sister ship Olympic. So there's strong, very, very strong documentary evidence that the ship on the ocean floor is not Titanic, but in fact the sister ship Olympic. The side plan of Titanic shown below reveals that not all bulkheads went as high as it is usually claimed. Okay. Next slide, slide 19. What is the evidence for a possible Titanic Olympic swap? Well, we've just seen the evidence from Robert Ballard, but there's more. Let's examine some of the evidence to see what proof we have. On the Olympic, the swan neck vent was shorter in profile than that fitted to the Titanic. However, after the Olympics, port side propeller blade had been replaced in Belfast in March 1912 of the swan neck vent suddenly matched that of the Titanic. While this could be explained by a modification, it is odd that the Titanic should depart from Belfast on April 2nd, 1912, just days before the ill-fated transatlantic voyage, with the same vent appearing lower than the one it had been outfitted with originally. This move created a complete reversal of the sister ship's swan neck vents. The question must be asked, and it is a provocative one. Why did the Belfast shipyard take the lower profile vent off the Olympic and replace it with a higher one, while taking the higher one off the Titanic and replacing it with the lower profile matching the Olympics? Hull plating from the wreck shown below has white and light gray paint showing through the black top coat. Hull plating from the wreck shown below has white and light gray paint. So the White Star Line would naturally wish for the flagship to be restored to service as quickly as possible. The longer the ship stayed in dry dock in Belfast, the longer it would divert its technicians and builders from completing the work on the sister ship Titanic. In addition, the lost revenues from not having the Olympic in service was extremely damaging, as were the exorbitant cost of the repairs. Most likely, the channel ribs were merely bent back into position with possible reinforcements. The hull plating was then repaired, with the ship put back in the water. The 6.5-week timeline for repairs in Belfast would provide time for such structural repairs. The price tag of 4 lost revenues came to $750,000. Exorbitant indeed, even by today's standards. Here in this picture, you can see damage to HMS Hawk with ram clearly still intact. The cruiser HMS Hawk had already passed Egypt Point, about 4 miles from Olympic. She was rapidly reducing the distance between herself and Olympic, and it appeared that both vessels were attempting to enter the same stretch of water, and there was obviously not enough space for both in the narrow channel. Commander William Frederick Blunt, master of HMS Hawk, adjusted the position by 5 degrees to give Olympic a little more breathing space, but the two ships were by now almost abreast, traveling at 16 knots. See the picture to see where the positioning was. Olympic tried to accelerate even harder to pull clear of danger, but as Hawk dropped back toward the rear of the liner, as the larger vessel eased ahead, again the suction and pull of Olympic's propellers came into play. HMS Hawk was rapidly heading portwards towards disaster, and so Commander Blunt rendered the port engine stopped and full astern on the starboard side engine. But it was all too little too late. Hawk smashed into Olympic's side. Its underwater battering ram, designed as it was to cause maximum damage to its foes, duly obliged with its friend too, inflicting serious damage to the much larger ship. So those enormous propellers cause incredible suction and pull, one of the factors that led to the collision. The Royal Navy inquiry into the incident on the 22nd of September 1911 not unexpectedly found the pilot of the Olympic, and thus the White Star Line, culpable for the accident, despite much evidence pointing towards the Hawk's helmsman bearing most of the blame, and this in effect meant that the White Star Line's insurance was null and void, and the company would therefore be liable to pay all the costs of the repairs to both ships themselves. In the picture featured below, Harlan and Wolff workers are shown leaving at the end of the shift in 1908. So the two ships were made to take on one another's profile appearances, literally swapping identities in terms of looks. While it is true that the ships are sometimes fitted to closely resemble their sister ships, one wonders why this wasn't done at the construction phase. A shrewd mind and discerning intellect would also ask why now, just before the Titanic's transatlantic maiden voyage to New York, the location of the future UN headquarters that would replace the League of Nations, with certain influential members on board during the crossing that did not share the same vision of world government as their Rockefeller-backed counterparts. So it was essentially a death trap, a kind of setup for those that were opposed to the Illuminati's vision of world government. And the Illuminati swapped the word Luciferian, and you've got it. They are Luciferians. They worship the fallen angel. Now, if you don't believe in all of that, and if you think it's all mythology, it doesn't matter. They do believe it, and they will kill you and your children because they believe it. And they don't care about you, and they don't care about your kids. And we'll get into that later, but it's true, and you got to face the truth. if we're ever going to be free of these psychopaths. In any of the pictures taken of the Olympic within the first few voyages, you can see that her lifeboats are painted completely white. When the Olympic returned to Belfast following her collision with the Hawk, the lifeboats were all painted brown around the gunnels to match those of the Titanic. Why the decision to paint the Olympic's lifeboats the same color as Titanic's in this time frame remains a mystery. These lifeboats could easily have been painted at any time. It appears that the White Star Line wished to make the lifeboats on both ships appear identical. When the Olympic left Belfast on March 7th, 2 additional portholes were added to the forecastle within the port side plating, matching those of the Titanic. The Olympic also had the same coal vents as the Titanic forward of the breakwater on the port side. The ships were now suddenly interchangeable to the casual observer. The ship swapping theory is not without precedent. Indeed, one of the most popular scams of the time was the ship swapping routine, which was usually used to claim insurance on an identical or almost identical ship that was beyond economic repair. The unwanted damaged ship would then be made to undergo an accident of some kind and an insurance claim made in respect of the switched ship, which would ordinarily have been impossible due to its poor state of repair. So by the time the Olympic left Belfast on March 7th, the 2 ships were virtually identical on the exterior. The window arrangements on B deck was the only notable exception. The Titanic's forward A deck screens had not yet been fitted by the time the Olympic left Belfast. If the ships had not been switched at that time, then when? They were never to meet again. If the 2 ships were switched, when was the window of opportunity? There was really only one day it could have been orchestrated. Knowing the secret society's penchant for choosing certain prescribed calendar dates for their covert operations as part of their signature, April 1st, better known as April Fool's Day, would be most apropos to pull off what would have been, at the time, the greatest deception in history, assuming that the switch of the 2 ships actually took place. History tells us that Captain Smith became the commander in charge of the Titanic's sea trials, but how could he oversee trials in Belfast if he were purportedly in Southampton aboard the Olympic? It is conceivable that Captain Smith might have brought the Olympic to Belfast. Haddock might have sailed the disguised Titanic back to Southampton to meet the April 3rd, 1912 departure date, while Smith took charge of the Olympic from Belfast, now converted to look like her younger sister ship. Quite literally, the 2 captains might have handed the 2 ships over to one another. If we follow the theory through, the Olympic would have had to depart from Southampton on the afternoon of March 30th, 1912, steam all the way to Belfast, some 570 miles, bringing her to port in the wee hours of April 1st. The schedule would have been tight and timing of the essence. The disguised Titanic would then be required to depart from Belfast around dawn on April 1st, in time to make it back to New York on April 3rd. There you can see a picture of the RMS Titanic under construction. Okay, so Olympic tried to accelerate even harder to pull clear of danger, but as the Hawk dropped back towards the rear of the liner as the larger vessel eased ahead, again the suction and pull of Olympic's propellers came into play. HMS Hawk was rapidly heading portwards towards disaster, and the commander, Blunt, ordered the port engine stopped and full astern on the starboard side engine. But it was all too little too late. Hawk smashed into the Olympic side, its underwater battering ram designed to cause maximum damage to foes, duly obliged with its friend, 2, inflicting serious damage to the much larger ship. There you go. There is a long history of rumors of the Titanic Olympic switch, and these still circulate from time to time in Belfast, as they had for the last 100 years. In addition to which, there are also rumors claiming that the Titanic disaster was just an insurance scam. Indeed, the switch insurance scam story was still being taught as fact in some Irish schools until quite recently. Even more compelling is the fact that Harold Sanderson, a White Star Line director, repeatedly referred to the name of the ship that sank as Olympic and not Titanic. This happened on at least 12 separate occasions in his testimony at the British inquiry. Take a look at this, folks. If you can, could you just have a quick look here? Can you spot the design differences between the two ships? Okay. Next slide. All right. So here we have a picture of John Jacob Astor IV with his pregnant wife, Madeline, nicknamed Maddie, was targeted by the Jesuit order manning the Titanic. Astor resisted the establishment of what became the American Empire's J.P. Morgan-backed socialist communist cartel capitalist central bank, the Federal Reserve Bank. Privately controlled by Papal Knights of Malta and Shriner Freemason on behalf of the Black Pope, a man named Franz Xavier Wernz at the time. It was the thieving King's Bank, known as the Federal Reserve System. Masonic son Vincent inherited $200 million, joined the CFR, and served the Jesuit orders FDR. There you go. By the way, John Astor was shanked on board the Titanic. He did not drown. He was shanked to death, and his body was discovered lacerated with wounds by some Newfoundland salvage operators. Originally, it was explained that when the chimney exploded, some shrapnel from the chimney must have caused these wounds and lacerations. Well, I strongly take exception with that theory. I believe he was shanked, stabbed because he tried to bribe his way off the ship, and he apparently bribed the wrong crew member who shanked him to prevent him from escaping. So there's a picture of David Blair. He was a British merchant seaman with the White Star Line who had been reassigned from the RMS Titanic just before the maiden voyage. Why does he have no death date, only his birth date? Due to his hasty departure, he accidentally failed to return a key to a storage locker believed to contain binoculars intended for use by the Crow's Nest lookout. Blair was originally appointed the second officer of Titanic. He had been with the ship during its trial voyages to test the ship's seaworthiness and the final journey from its place of construction in Belfast. Okay. So that's the man that explains why the lookouts did not have their glasses, their binoculars, at the time of the so-called iceberg collision. Okay, so lookout Frederick Fleet is shown in this picture. The sailor who rang the bell to warn the bridge. Ship's crew, like Fleet, were taken into dry dock after the disaster and under military orders were sworn to secrecy about what actually happened on board. The Official Secrets Act prevented them from opening their mouth and making any statement. Okay. The type of binoculars that were supposed to be used on the night in question, shown right there in the picture. That's what they look like. When Fleet was questioned on the witness stand, he was asked, had you had the binoculars, would it have made much of a difference? And he said, well, yes, enough to have missed the iceberg. The key would have opened, this key shown in the picture would have opened a locker where the Crow's Nest binoculars were safely housed. Mr. Blair was the second officer in charge of the Crow's Nest, and he had the key, which we believe was for the binoculars locker in the nest. He forgot to leave the key behind as the Titanic set off on its maiden voyage. Without it, the shipmates were unable to open a locker in the Crow's Nest containing the binoculars, which were designated for the lookouts. All right, so Charles Lightoller, who replaced Blair as second officer and should have been given the key, was the most senior officer to survive the disaster. Mr. Blair from Tayside was 37 when he sailed on the Titanic from Belfast to Southampton, and Mr. Fleet recalled his shipmate having the binoculars with him during the 2-day trip. He had been due to be the second officer for the maiden voyage to New York on April 10th, but was told at the 11th hour he would not be going. Bosses of the White Star Line decided Henry Wilde, the experienced chief officer of the Titanic sister ship, the Olympic, should be transferred instead. As a result, everyone was moved down a rank, but Mr. Blair was deemed too senior to take up the position of third officer, and was tasked to another ship. Although the move would prove to save Mr. Blair's life, he wrote of his disappointment in a postcard he sent to his sister-in-law. He wrote, "I'm afraid I shall have to step out to make room for the chief officer of the Olympic. This is a magnificent ship. I feel very disappointed I am not to make her first voyage." There you go. Okay, so Jesuit coadjutors William M. Murdoch and Captain Edward J. Smith featured in this picture in 1912. There you go. They're Jesuit coadjutors. They were working for the Jesuit order as agents. And this murder operation can be placed squarely at their feet. They're involved. They're complicit. They did it. Villains, both of them. All right, so Captain Smith to the right, posing with his first officer, privy to the plot, kept the Jesuit order's wealthy Jewish targets from boarding the partially filled lifeboats by holding a revolver at the passengers and insisting that women and children be allowed to board first. There is no way that these U.S. congressmen, John Astor and Isidore Strauss, would not have been given seats on board the lifeboats. They represented the national security of the United States. There's just no way that these highly important VIP people would not have been allowed to board lifeboats unless there was a reason for contramanding such a protocol. And there is a very good reason. It's called murder. Murder most dire. They were killing the men. They were killing the men on the orders of their superiors so that any opposition to the Federal Reserve Bank would be pushed out of the way. It's murder most foul. That's what it is. Do you agree with that, Andy?
Yeah, I was just trying to work out why they held guns to them, but then again, I guess it was to stop the panic at the time. But yeah, it's definitely murder. I mean, the evidence of the hole, and the colours. I mean, it's obviously been an insurance job. But why don't the mainstream media and anybody with a small part of common sense realize that? Because even today, there's a lot of people realize it from obviously yourself. You've written a lot of articles about it, John Hamer. Yeah, people are waking up, but why don't they just get it? It was an insurance fraud, and it was the Olympic that sunk. Simple. I mean, the radio show, I think, which I hope people look in the description, is much more real than this. You kind of feel that you're in the ship at the same time. I mean, it's really good. So I urge people to read this and then listen to the show. It's first class. Shame that no one wants to publish it.
Well, the truth is something that the establishment is allergic to because you know why? They're corrupt, and that's why they don't want the truth to come out, because they would be exposed as the corrupt individuals that they are. I mean, it's a generational affair. It doesn't get better. Corruption just hands over corruption to the next corrupt officials, and that's how it's been for the whole 21st century and still today. So nothing changes. So they're not going to blow the whistle on their predecessors. It'll just expose them for what they are.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the same with our governments at the moment. I guess
Do you remember?
The Americans are pretty lucky because they've got Trump at the moment. Although I think he's going like 80-90% of the way. But our government at the moment, the UK and Canada, I think if you could shoot them politically, shoot them. Let's fire the gun, because Starmer wants to take all the money from people that are disabled and that can't work. He wants you to literally beg for benefit, and then obviously Trudeau's got his own.
Yeah, yeah, it's appalling.
Bring back Maggie Tuttle; she'll sort them out.
Yeah,
It's a fantastic
Prime Minister.
It's a fantastic PDF. This one about Titanic. But I don't know. Like I was saying, I get more excited when I listen to that radio show again. You feel that you're actually a part of the ship. But I think combined with this, if they listen to the radio show, then go through the slides, although that's got slides on it as well, it really makes you feel part of everything.
Yeah, it really brings the event of over a century ago right next to you, so that it's happening in real time. That's how it feels.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the voice actors in that radio play did an excellent job. Richard Wallace, who played J.P. Morgan, is absolutely outstanding.
He was the real thing.
Yeah.
Apart from the real one's dead, but yeah, he was a sound alike of the real thing.
Yeah. I took on a few of the roles just because of a shortage of manpower, and I don't know, I did my best with the English dialects, but I don't know how close it was to the Liverpudlian dialect in the actual show.
It was sound. It was sound.
It was sound. All right. Okay. So the lookouts at the time of the collision, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, maintained during the inquiries that they were informed they were to have no binoculars during the voyage. Fleet, when asked by a commission of inquiry composed of members of the U.S. Congress whether or not they would have seen the berg from farther away, replied that he would have seen it a bit sooner. When asked how much sooner, he responded, "With enough to get out of the way." So the photo below shows the height of the crow's nest relative to the bridge.
Actually, I think the slide's playing up. But
it's
just something simple as locking up.
Is that right?
The binoculars was enough to it wants to play up again. Oh dear, it was going so well as well.
Okay.
Right, so I'll just find out what slide that was. I think that was 30. Hang on, 40. Yeah. Let me just refresh the page. I think that's what I might need to do.
Okay.
It's just technology again.
All righty.
Just trying to wait for this to.
There was an Italian passenger who claimed to have witnessed the collision of a ship with a ramming rod that smashed right into the ship called Titanic, which was actually the Olympic, in the middle of the night. And he actually had an affidavit written to the effect that this happened. And I believe the name of the ship was Sirius. And I'm quite serious. Named after the dog star Sirius.
I'm just trying to find. It's going so well as well. Technology.
Well, that's all right. I've got my my own article that I can look at, Andy.
Yeah, do that while I'm trying to find where we was.
Yeah, I've been watching some videos by a YouTuber by the name of Chuck Swindoll, and he's done some good videos. For example, one video is called The Khazarian Mafia, subtitled The God Eaters. Now, my teacher is Sanda Davis, a great spiritual teacher who calls herself the Mother. And the date given by the Mother, Sanda Davis, for the takeover of the evil cabal, call them the Luciferians if you like, was 12,000 years ago. The video, The Khazarian Mafia, The God Eaters by Chuck Swindoll, dates the takeover of evil to the younger, drier period of Earth's history. Yeah, that's younger, drier, D-R-Y-E-R, period of Earth's history. That is when the Elohim, which I believe are the fallen angels, manipulated our DNA to reduce our chromosomes from 24 to 23. They also founded the Babylonian, Egyptian, Chaldean settlements. They used their influence to create the money magic that has kept us as debt slaves for 12,000 years. So there is evidence for the Mother's date for the takeover of evil 12,000 years ago. And we can explain how they did it and how we can now be set free. Have you heard of CRISPR technology, Andy? It's a technology that allows the geneticists to actually reconfigure the genome of any organism. They can use it for gain of function research to make a pathogen like the coronavirus more pathogenic and more virulent, or they can just simply alter the DNA of a organism, including humans.
No, not heard of it.
I'm kind of wondering whether they could employ CRISPR technology to unfuse chromosome 2 and 3 in the human genome to basically restore our chromosome count back to 24 chromosomes from 23.
Nope, that's me lost.
What it just seems to me to be possible that if they fused chromosome 2 and 3 to reduce our chromosome count from 24 to 23, back some 12,000 years ago, they basically genetically modified us to be less evolved.
Well, yeah.
So let's reverse it. Let's get the CRISPR technology going, unfuse chromosome 2 and 3, get our 24 chromosome count back, and let's allow the species to evolve back to its proper state. Seems to me to be possible. I don't see why not. So the Younger Dryas period was caused by a cataclysm resulting from a meteor strike. And by the way, I believe that it's the same meteor strike that actually wiped out the population of England, the Celtic population of England wiped out, so that when the Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes came over on their trading mission, they said, "Where is everybody?" And they just set up camp and stayed and became the Anglo-Saxons.
Actually, talking about that, I was just thinking, the people in them days, whether it's Saxons, whether it was when Cromwell was around, and they're on their horseback, they're fighting, they seem to have more fight in them than we do these days. We're like, pardon the expression, take a pill, have an injection, we'll numb you up, and then you won't worry the world about the problems. Maybe that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, they had a lot more jam, didn't they?
And I've got the screen back when you're ready.
Oh, yeah, I see that. All right. So in a book called The Riddle of the Titanic, Robin Gardner and Dan Vanderveer were the authors. There's a record of an explosion and an outbreak of fire in a coal bunker number 10 of the Titanic before she set sail. It could have been extinguished in port at Southampton before she set sail, but because Captain Smith was intent upon setting a crossing record, he ordered the ship to proceed out of port, and that the fire brigade put out the fires while the ship was in sailing mode. There is no reasonable excuse for it not to have been with the great port's firefighting facilities that would but little impede her departure time. A responsible captain would have ordered the ship to stay in port until the fire had been safely put out. But obviously, this criminal Smith was far from being a responsible captain. Instead of this, however, an additional 12 firemen were signed on to extinguish the blaze at sea. In addition, efforts were made to conceal the fire from Captain Maurice Harvey Clark, the Board of Trade inspector. The explosion below deck blew a hole in the hull below the waterline near the bow. And by the way, Andy, there were some Chinese passengers that were discovered on board, and it took about a century for this information to come out. These passengers had been forgotten about by history, but an enterprising Chinese journalist dug up this story.
Wow.
They were actually found in the bottom of a lifeboat, which included among its passengers Bruce Ishmay, who is the owner of the Titanic. So I figure he must have been involved, Bruce Ishmay. And I believe that these Chinese passengers may possibly have been agents, and that they were assigned the job of packing gelignite into the coal that was placed in the coal bunker, causing an explosion. I don't want to.
Apparently, there were 6 Chinese sailors.
Yes, like that. Yeah, I believe
including Fang Lang.
Yes. It's just odd that, they'd be hidden from history for so long. Why? That's the question. All right. There are photographs in existence of like the one featured below, if you can see it, displaying a tear in the hull adjacent to a forward hold in the bow section of Titanic. As is obvious from the photograph, the plating is pushed outwards, evidence of an internal explosion. There have been several explanations touted for this damage. One of the more popular being that water within the hold became pressurized when the ship struck the ocean floor. Had the pressure not had a much easier escape passage through the hatch cover of the hold rather than through the inch-thick steel of the hull? This may have been plausible. Possibly significantly, the French team who surveyed the wreck following the rediscovery by Robert Ballard, in 1985, concluded that the damage had been caused by an internal explosion of some kind. Yeah, damn right, the coal bunker explosion. And I put it to you that it wasn't just a coal explosion, it was gelignite planted inside the coal that caused the explosion. So in other words, the ship was sabotaged before it even set sail and was taking on water, probably right from Southampton, which explains why it was leaning badly to one side during the crossing, because no doubt water had probably breached some of the bulkheads and was the ship was effectively already sinking before it reached that so-called iceberg. Slightly further to the north of Titanic's position at the time of the alleged disaster in the Grand Banks region was the Royal Navy's cruiser HMS Sirius. That's the ship that the Italian passenger claimed he saw ram the ship in the middle of the night. However, Sirius was not the only naval vessel in the general vicinity at the time. The American and British navies were allegedly undertaking a joint anti-submarine exercise in the area at the time of the disaster. In fact, this naval presence was substantial indeed and included not only several submarines and anti-submarine vessels, but also destroyers, cruisers, and at least one battleship. All these warships would have been fitted with powerful wireless capabilities, wireless being the state-of-the-art communication method of choice of any discerning military superpower at the time. So it's interesting because we have seen in the late 20th century many false flag terrorist operations where there were joint emergency exercises taking place at the same time as the actual event, not least 9/11. And so it's a good cover for covert operations to have some kind of a security exercise happening at the same time as the actual terrorist event. And it seems that that's exactly the MO they used with the Titanic disaster. They had a Navy exercise granting cover so that when Sirius came and rammed the ship in the middle of the night, who knew? No one except that one passenger who witnessed it. All right, so one or more British naval vessels had been in the vicinity at the time and allegedly close enough to observe the sinking liner and record its exact position, despite their blatant ignoring of the numerous SOS and CQD alerts sent by the stricken vessel. This also fits with the sightings of the so-called mystery ships that several witnesses spotted close by in the aftermath of the incident, and which strangely failed to respond to the distress calls. Charles Lightower, second officer, trying in vain to attract the attention of one of the unidentified vessels, stated at one point to a witness in frustration, "I wish I had a 6-inch gun so that I could put a hole in her." Why did Captain Smith not have the fire put out before setting sail? Why would a captain of his sterling record risk passengers and crew, the greatest seagoing vessel in history, along with the reputation of the whole White Star Line, Why did he hide the fire and behave so irresponsibly? Could the fire or some internal structural damage account for the ship's leaning aspect, where it was leaning over to the port side? Take a look at that picture of the wreck taken by Robert Ballard's exploration sub. Windows unevenly spaced, which is another anomaly. Okay, go ahead, Andy. In November of 2000, the Royal Navy actually conceded that one of its vessels, HMS Sirius, was in the vicinity at the time Titanic foundered. Not for the first time or the last, one would assume. It transpires that the Royal Navy was being somewhat economical with the truth. Now, keep in mind that ship, Sirius, is the very ship that rammed the ocean liner in the middle of the night, as witnessed by the Italian passenger who filled out an affidavit to the effect. Okay, should we wrap up the slideshow there, Andy? What do you think?
Yeah, no problem. Can't remember what we're on. Yeah, 146. So we're 147 next time, because then we've got another 15 nearly.
Yeah, well, I think that we've done enough. I think we've covered all the major story elements of the Titanic. So I think you can just fuse these two accounts together to make one show. I'm going to wrap up with some more information about the Luciferians. Put it this way, folks. A Luciferian cabal is the global elite that basically runs the world. They control the world government, United Nations, and its various agencies. The World Economic Forum, they control it. They control the World Health Organization, which is basically world government agencies. And they were controlling the Jesuit order of the Roman Catholic Church, which is the military wing of the Vatican. Vatican stands for House of Cain, so these are Cainites. They are of the bloodline of Satan. They are direct descendants of Cain, as in the Cain and Abel story in the Bible. So I've explained how they, fallen angels, had tampered with our DNA about 12,000 years ago. Call them the Elohim, call them what you will. And I explained that this happened during the period in Earth's history known as the Younger Dryas period. This is the research of Chuck Swindoll. This is where this information is coming from. So let us unlock the God code in our DNA. Deoxy is a Latin root word meaning God. Ribo, keep in mind DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. So deoxy is a Latin word meaning God. Ribo in the Semitic languages is the same as the name Rabbi. In Arabic, Rab meaning master or Lord. Deoxyribo, God, Lord, and Master is what it basically means. Nucleic, at the center. Acid, a chemical found at the center. So God's essence is infused in the human genome. Deoxyribonucleic acid. There you go. All right, so, and the Elohim, the fallen angels, tampered with our God genes to attenuate our divinity and divine nature. A fall of man occurred, yes, but not because of Adam eating from an apple forbidden to him in the garden. No, but as the fault of the Elohim who committed the original sin, not us, of tampering with Adam's divine nature by altering our human genome by fusing chromosome 2 and 3, thus reducing the totality of our chromosomes from 24 to 23. Chuck Swindoll has done a very amazing job of exposing the Luciferian agenda. He begins by examining why they practice child sacrifice as part of their deeply pathological satanic ritual abuse. He reminds us that part of the reason for this is to harvest adrenochrome, a biochemical substance found in the blood of SRA victims that this sick cult harvests for their depraved reasons. So according to Chuck, and I quote, there is much interest these days in Luciferians and child sacrifice due to the emerging discoveries of the heinous activity rife within the ranks of global banking, political leadership, and the Vatican. Remember that Reverend Kevin Annett from Canada visited the Vatican, meaning House of Cain, to investigate its involvement in child trafficking and child SRA. It was not long after this visit that Pope Benedict was forced to resign. There was an arrest warrant for Pope Benedict the 16th. His real name, Joseph Aloysius Ratzinger. And he was forced to remain within the grounds of the Vatican to avoid arrest. What you're talking about is 108 acres. The Vatican is a very, very small, essentially, country. But it's been reduced in territory over the centuries so that it now occupies a square of about 108 acres. He was kept under house arrest, basically, in his own territory. He couldn't leave. If he were to have left the Vatican, he could have been arrested. So he was forced to remain within the grounds of the Vatican to avoid arrest. It is monstrous to consider that some RCC officials, like Ratzinger, posing as holy men, are in fact Luciferian to the core. It is even more monstrous to consider that the Vatican means House of Cain and is the Luciferian core of the Roman Catholic Church. Does this imply that the RCC is a Luciferian cult? Probably it'd be more accurate to suggest that the deep church embodies a Luciferian cult. Certainly the Jesuit order in its general, also known as the Black Pope, is Luciferian. The Black Popes are drawn from the black nobility of Europe, who are Cainites, without doubt. Swindle unapologetically makes the bold claim that Luciferians have run the world since organized human history began. They have been steering and shaping the planetary cultural vectors since long before the United States, Rome, and even the Egyptians. Swindle is right, of course. And Hollywood is a prime example of a cultural powerhouse run by the Luciferians. Its name is derived from holly, which is used to fashion their magic wands. Hollywood is meant to imply a grove of trees where satanic witches convene to carry out their ceremonies. One can infer the same from Pinewood Studios in England. Hollywood has been spreading the most depraved form of Luciferian culture worldwide. One reason why Asian countries have turned away from Hollywood and are tuning in more and more to cinematic and television content from Asia. Swindle elaborates further. The cult goes way back. It is also known as the old religion. Okay, Andy, you with me?
Yeah, I'm with you.
They have maintained direct contact with a fourth dimensional being known as Lucifer for thousands of years. Lucifer is a parasitic, genderless phantasmagoria. It has been anthropomorphized into human recognizable forms and names throughout time and all over the world. It and a legion of other fourth dimensional beings like it have been pilfering the human race since the beginning. Luciferians communicate directly with Lucifer through the ritual practice of child sacrifice. This practice to invoke and convene the Leviathan originated in the cult of Baal. Baal is not just another name for Leviathan or Lucifer or Moloch. These are all referencing this same extremely evil phantasmagoric energy. The cult of Baal, which is the oldest cult ever established on this planet, is the ancient precursor to Luciferianism. Luciferianism, I personally consider a formalized and highly organized cult of Baal, says Chuck Swindoll. Have you ever felt like there is a glass ceiling in society, and despite your best attempts, you are not allowed to break into a higher society or a higher social rank because you are simply unwelcome? Swindle explains well why this hierarchy exists and why class and rank has been imposed on all of us. Luciferianism is both a religion and a bloodline. Satanism is a lower echelon of Luciferianism for those outside the bloodline and wealth prerequisites to qualify as a pure Luciferian. Money can buy you into the Luciferian cult, but only bloodline accesses leadership. The highest ranks in the Luciferian cult are not voted in. They're bestowed rank through female genetic lineage, steered by the cult through select breeding within the blue blood family lines. Like a king's executive rulership is bestowed to his firstborn son, it's a similar practice in Luciferianism, but like the Jews, it's the female who carries the genetic that counts. David Icke once explained that the First Lady of the U.S. President is called so because of her role in passing on the Luciferian blue bloodline. He also explained that Diana Spencer was chosen as a broodmare for Prince Charles because she was from the Spencer family, which has a pedigree of high rank within the Luciferian nobility. Swindle then proceeds to explain who the top tier Luciferian families are. Luciferians involve 13 plus 1 hidden bloodline family. Instead of just one family ruling like an imperialist kingly monarchy, Luciferians have many at the top, so it's a bit more complicated and integrates many more ranking members. There is much disagreement and infighting and personal agenda between the families, but they all follow a similar agenda, and that is to control and rule the planet. Here's a list of the families, and we can thank Fritz Springmeier for writing the great book, The Bloodlines of the Illuminati, for exposing these families. Astor, remember John Astor? He was on board the Titanic. Bundy, Collins, DuPont, Freeman, Kennedy, Lee, Onassis, Reynolds, Rockefeller, Rothschild, Russell, Van Dyne, and Merovingian. Don't forget that Bundy, the name Bundy, there was a very famous serial killer in the United States, Ted Bundy, of the Bundy family. Was he practicing satanic ritual abuse? No doubt. Was he killing children for that purpose? No doubt. We have a serial killer here in Toronto who's now serving time for his crimes, who I believe was conducting with his wife, Karla Homolka, satanic ritual abuse, killing of children. And I believe his name, by the way, is Paul Bernardo. And there was a professor at the University of Toronto who wrote a book called New World Order Corruption in Canada. His name was Robert O'Driscoll. And he had something to say about this matter. Bob Rae, the Premier of Ontario, was Premier when Paul Bernardo was on trial, and he ordered a media blackout of the trial during the time that Bernardo was on trial. And Canadians, well, Ontarians, had to go across the border to Buffalo, New York, to purchase newspapers that would allow them to read about the Bernardo trial. Does that sound like cover up to you? Certainly does to me. Why were they imposing a media blackout on the Bernardo trial? What was being shared in the trial as information that would have been damaging to the Luciferian elite? Here in our country, I don't know if you have it over there, Andy, but on the police cars it says serve and protect. Serve and protect who? They don't protect me. They don't protect my family. They serve and protect the power elite. Who are the power elite? The Luciferians. I invite you, when you come to Canada, Andy, to visit Toronto Police Headquarters. There's all kinds of Masonic symbols in the College Street Masonic Police Headquarters. You got to see it. You just got to see it. It's just amazing. And the front doors, the entrance spells OTO, which is Ordo Templi Orientis, which the Satanist Aleister Crowley headed for some time. Unbelievable.
Yeah, we have Protect and Serve, I believe it is, in Scotland, but in England, I'm not sure. I was actually looking at the satanic ritual abuse stuff. We had a guy, can't think of his name now, but I used to do loads of shows with him. He's a Chinese guy, and he proved without a shadow of a doubt in this country, in the UK, that it is happening daily, weekly, hourly. And they locked him up for 10, 20 years like they did Peter Hochschwer for his knowledge. And I was just looking at Wikipedia, and it still says the satanic panic is a moral panic. But what made me laugh is over 12,000 unsubstantiated cases in the 80s, 90s, and 2000. How can 12,000 cases be all wrong? There comes a time when some of them have got to be absolute right. And what makes me know that's the fact, because some police stations and websites, some rape crisis centres actually believe in satanic ritual abuse. So, why isn't Wikipedia going along the same lines, or that kind of indexing, why don't, because if rape crises are saying this and the police are saying this, why isn't it proper, in the indexes? It's ridiculous.
Well, Chuck Swindoll, in his video Lucifer and Luciferianism, he actually talks about how the FBI track everything we do. They track our banking transactions. They track our travel arrangements. They track our purchases, our habits, our everything. But they cannot track over 1 million children going missing in the United States and don't keep any records on any of these missing children. Then that means they're involved. Obviously, they're involved. They're turning a blind eye to the practice of satanic ritual abuse because they practice it themselves. They're involved.
Absolutely. No, I do agree with that. Yeah, no, I've forgotten his name again, but he was a bloody good. His name was William something, this satanic guy in London, and they locked him up for 20 years. And all he did was show the evidence, the victims came forward. They, they gave him the stories and whatever. and he was always saying that, you know, this is Luciferia's lodge, you know, what's happening, and I can't find his name. William Wong, I think his name, yeah. William Wong. But I still can't find the story, but only heard, you know, from friends that, you know, he got 10, 20 years. Hope he didn't actually. I mean, because when he came on my shows and he did 6 shows, he never named the victims. Yeah, Wilfred Wong, actually, not William. Wilfred Wong. Satanic Retribution. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So yeah, sorry. Yeah, Wilfred Wong. He's a brilliant guy.
He sounds like a Chinese gentleman.
There we go. I found him. The 56-year-old was jailed for 17 years. In fact, out of respect to this guy, hang on, let me find this. There. Just out of respect, I'll put that good book author on in a minute. That was you, by the way. Yeah, there we are. It says, and this is really pisses me off. When you met somebody and there was calm, they was collective, they didn't name victims, they could prove everything. So plotter Wilfred Wong's fanciful and ridiculous excuses after botched kidnap attempt. The 56-year-old was jailed for 17 years plus 5 years on extended license. Now, that wouldn't have been the real person there, surely, because he didn't look like that. I know he does a little bit. Let me read this. A man convicted of plotting to kidnap a child. I wouldn't have thought he did that. Kidnap somebody. He might have tried to take them away from a serious situation.
Yeah, probably was probably.
Oh, there we go. Yeah,
probably Wilfred to rescue the kid, and they accused him of being the child abductor. Typical.
Yeah, Wilfred Wong, 56, claims to have been campaigning for years to protect children. Of course, in the case of this North Wales youngster known as Child A, there was no need for protection because there was no evidence of abuse. Yeah, now that's the kind of thing I guess he would have done. He would have tried to take somebody away from harm. But why would you get 17 years for kidnapping? Because you believe that, you know, somebody might have been satanically a victim. I don't get that, because I could kill Joanne tonight, my wife, which I'd never ever do, and I've never even thought of doing. But let's pretend I did, because she's doing my head in. I'd probably get 8 or 10 years, but 17 years because you're trying to protect a child? No, it just proves what you just said about satanic ritual abuse. Yeah, that is actually Wilfred Wong. Now I think about it.
Is that okay?
And the left-hand side. Wow.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm gobsmacked now. You've opened a can of worms. I knew in my head he was jailed for a long time, but I couldn't believe it was that long. Wow.
Amazing.